Hello and welcome to GreenPlanet BluePlanet Podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs who are committed to planetary purpose, or in other words, holistic visions for planet Earth. My name is Julian Guderlei, and in today's episode, I am interviewing Sophia Rokhlin. Sophia is an author and non-profit organizer from New York City. She holds a BA in anthropology and religious studies from the New School in Ecological Economics and from the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She's a program coordinator at the Chaikuni Institute and directs the Sustainable Ayahuasca Cultivation Program at the Temple of the Way of Light, a traditional plant medicine retreat center in the Peruvian Amazon. She's the co-author of When Plants Dream, Ayahuasca, Amazonian Shamanism, and the Global Psychedelic Renaissance on the global spread of ayahuasca. And that's what we get to talk about today. She's also an advisor on the Ayahuasca Community Committee at the Chacruna Institute of Psychedelic Plant Medicines that is currently based in Peru. And Sophia, you're also starting a complete new organization in the field of regenerative agriculture. So with that little intro, welcome to the show, Sophia. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Absolutely. Let's maybe start with what's most alive for you. You just mentioned that when we chatted, that you're starting a new organization on regenerative agriculture in the Amazon. And
Sure. Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. So I guess it deserves a little bit of a backstory. And in When Plants Dream, I write about it. When Plants Dream is a book I just co-authored with Daniel Pinchbeck, and we write about sort of the different cultural dimensions of the global spread of ayahuasca. And we don't necessarily, there is no one singular story of the spread of this psychoactive sacrament, but we cover more of the legal dimensions, the botanical aspects, the sort of the anthropological perspectives, some of the debates around the commodification and the globalization of these plants. And my interest in this subject really stemmed from a personal journey and a pursuit to kind of be connected to a broader community. I was born and raised in New York City, and super, secular society, only child to immigrant parents. And I was always searching for meaning, community, ritual. And I didn't really find it anywhere until I encountered plant medicines, and specifically plant medicines within sort of indigenous contexts. And with that kind of led me down this road to exploring ayahuasca and ayahuasca healing. And yeah, I mean, long story short, basically, I started to realize, that the communities that I've worked with are all devastated, more or less, really, by the presence of multinational corporations, petroleum extraction, agricultural expansion, you name it. And today we see these, devastating isn't even the right word, almost paralyzing fires in the Amazon. And understanding, that these communities that have spent, hundreds, if not thousands of years developing a relationship to their land and the plants, are kind of, in imminent danger of, in some cases, what feels pretty dramatically like genocide in Brazil, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, with that, I started to look around at the transformational community. And this is everybody, people who are sitting in Tony Robbins audiences, to yoga, to psychedelic research and science. And I noticed that there's sort of a cultural yearning to actually have our personal transformation be connected to some sort of an earth transformation, right? Real reforestation and remediation programs. And, with that, with my allies from the Temple of the Way of Light and the Chaikuni Institute, we're starting a new nonprofit called Aini. And Aini is really just about that. Aini is a Quechua word. It means reciprocity and interconnectedness. And the idea behind it really is that, our personal transformation is the prerequisite to creating sustainable and, if not regenerative, sort of environmental change. And we need a shift of perspective that's fundamental, really, before we can actually create new systems that will sustain life on Earth. Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting and very beautifully put. And then maybe they won't even be systems at that point anymore, but
right.
but part of a larger spiral. But basically, Aini, the word reciprocity, like that makes me curious because it's a word we hear, I guess, a lot in the Western culture, but I don't feel like we're actually doing the best job embodying it. And um, even if I look at my own life, I mean, most of my interactions are still somewhat connected to a transaction, right? Which kind of bases it in the old system, like no matter how you go about it. So tell me a little bit more how the indigenous cultures and your research and your work with indigenous cultures, maybe specifically in Peru, how that word Aini and reciprocity, what kind of importance it carries for them.
Well, so Aini is a Quechua word, and it's a word that actually it's like ayahuasca, interestingly, which is also a Quechua word. And the Quechua are some of the communities who are there. Quechua is the third most spoken language in South America after Spanish and Portuguese. So it's one of the most sort of prosperous indigenous cultures there, amidst a culture of not much indigenous prosperity. So, the idea that everything is interconnected, really, and reciprocity isn't necessarily the most elegant translation of it, but for us that has a certain meaning. But the idea is that everything that I do is connected somehow to something else, and all beings are a part of an interconnected network of relationship through forces visible and invisible, and that's really the guiding principle. Understanding that we can work for others, we can communicate with others, and we can collaborate with others with the ultimate knowledge that we may not receive that immediately in a sort of a transactional sense, but in an almost energetic sense, and just understanding that through the act of giving and through the act of putting generosity outwards, we will receive that in one form or another.
Yeah, very beautiful. I like that you mentioned that the translation might be in itself already a little limited. And that's often the case, I feel, with indigenous languages. And I don't know Quechua too well, but I've spent some time with the Guarani in and around Paraguay. So a lot of those words don't really translate at all.
Yeah, and especially studying ayahuasca. I mean, I've been very interested in looking at the different words that people use to describe ayahuasca, and the sort of the anthropomorphization, or calling ayahuasca she, a feminine entity, when in reality there are no indigenous communities that I know that actually describe ayahuasca as a feminine entity. So just understanding how the desires that we in the West feel are sort of superimposed onto these sort of indigenous cosmovisions to satisfy some sort of a narrative that we need to emerge for our own orientation.
So in the book, When Plants Dream, you and Daniel Pinchbeck wrote about the spread of ayahuasca, right? And like the way it's turned from probably 20 years ago, you could hardly publicly talk about it, to a global phenomenon at this point. Maybe just elaborate a little bit more about the book and the kind of your journey with the book.
Yeah, I've come to think of my journey writing the book a lot like an ayahuasca ceremony itself. Like, for those of you who are not familiar with the physiological symptoms, it involves nausea, sweating, dizziness, and just it was a hard journey to write that book. Yeah, it was really, there were lots of, more than anything, I think doubts about who has the right to say something in this, and being really, really conscious that to not act as an authority on a subject, but rather as somebody who's witnessing something from their own perspective, and to share that perspective in a way that feels grounded and doesn't sort of tend to perpetuate any sort of like neo-colonial anthropologist perspectives on things. So, I mean, those were sort of like the main issues that I grappled with writing the book. But ultimately what I think is offered is a really interesting perspective, where we sort of balance out, he said, she said, they think, and kind of looking at all of the different facets of this phenomenon. And yeah, I mean, I think another challenge of writing this book was, there's so much research that's constantly emerging in the scientific fields and the medical fields, but even in like the archaeological, realms, we're constantly getting new information. And that's just within our Western framework of validating and creating knowledge, right? But, for indigenous communities, they have an entirely way of seeing things, and each community has their own cosmovision and approach to ayahuasca and plant medicine and spirits, and the significance of outsiders or foreigners coming and sort of getting to know the plants. So, and I think another thing, the reason why Daniel and I seem to have a sort of natural alliance writing this was because we both believe that psychedelics sort of provide a new, they kind of clean our perspective and help us to see things from a new angle. And that's the angle that we'll need in order to advance as a culture into a more sort of compassionate and collaborative framework, especially ecologically speaking. Yeah. And I was totally lost. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I was just ready to sit in waiting rooms until I died, to get some external validation. And then, I found plant medicine found me, we encountered each other, and I finally found meaning in my life, and it wasn't necessarily meaning like, this is the meaning. The meaning doesn't have a point. The meaning is just a vibration. It's like you are a gardener in this planet, and we're just gardeners here. Yeah.
I like that the meaning has a vibration. I mean, this is a vibrational reality, vibrational universe, right? So anyone who's ever experienced those states through plant medicines or extended breath work or long time meditation, if that's someone's way, I think feels that resonance, right? And meaning, I like how you put that and I myself have been in those waiting rooms at some point in my life, where you're in some kind of a meaningless experience. And it's almost, for me, I remember, it's almost like until I realized that there is so much more profound meaning in that we are the gardeners of this earth, we are the stewards of this planet. So we kind of do come from the future to steward in a new kind of way of living with each other, right? Once that essence is felt in one's life, it's apparent. It's so apparent that before there was just nothing. We just were busy for doing something, to chase something, to create some kind of metric and system and linearity that tries to predict tomorrow, that tries to create a stable income for a person, a country, a nation, whatever. And it's kind of a contrary experience to life, so that resonance of richness is missing. I love how you said that.
Yeah, and it's lonely too, I mean, it's very before, I mean, it's part and parcel, to the psychedelic experience that people feel interconnectedness, people feel this famous infamous ego dissolution, in the sense of like, my identity isn't me necessarily, but I suddenly realized that I'm a compilation of millions of different organisms and species just kind of holding it together in this little meat robot. And yeah, I mean, that's really like for many people that I've interviewed and I've met and I work with, it was that ego dissolution that really kicked in the sense like, oh shit, our fates are all intertwined, and we need to look out for each other and work together in a way that's radically different from anything that any of our parents or any of the books or any of the the politicians might tell us. Yeah,
it's time for newness. And so in that kind of interconnectedness between different cultures and areas of the planet, maybe share a little bit about the pros and the cons of the global spread of ayahuasca and the way that like us Westerners are interacting with native cultures. Like I'd love to hear your view on both the good parts about it, and also the controversial things and things that some people might be aware of and others might not have heard about before.
Sure, yeah. Whew, I mean, this is all I think about, so it's almost hard to articulate it. It's kind of, well, even at the root of it, I've come to understand that shamanism is about ambiguity. Right? It's about uncertainty. It's about lightness and darkness. And it's about this realm and that realm. It's always about this sort of liminal territory between the certain and the uncertain, and the seen and the unseen. And that's very hard for us. I mean, speaking for myself, but I think generally the people who I live with, Westerners, people from industrialized societies, it's very hard for us to understand that there is that these two worlds can exist together. So, at the root of it, I would also say that the global spread of ayahuasca is also inherently ambiguous, because shamanism itself is quite ambiguous, right? It's not just love and light, like we often sort of see articulated in the retreat centers and this and that, but it takes some profound internal scuba diving and encountering unseen forces and these things that we're not sure how to handle. So, I mean, from a cultural perspective, recently ayahuasca has been sort of heralded as this botanical panacea that's, has unparalleled ability to heal treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, a number of different sort of ailments that are, very, very popular in our society today. And with that, people are also saying, look at how beautiful it is that we have an opportunity to communicate and work together with Indigenous communities who have been traditionally repressed, oppressed, and really learn and humble ourselves and learn from their botanical knowledge and experience. And I would say I wouldn't say as a con, but sort of as a shadow aspect to that, is that these days I live and work in the Peruvian Amazon. And more than anything, I see there's a sustainability issue on the horizon. So I've spoken with quite a few people who have said, that their vines, which are sort of ayahuasca is a combination of two plants, Diplopteris cabrerana or Secotria viridis. It's a DMT containing plant. And then the Banisteriopsis capi, which is a woody vine. It grows in these beautiful double helices, and it takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years to grow, usually about 7 years. So anyway, you see that with the sort of global demand for ayahuasca, more and more people are going out into the wild and hacking these vines down to the root. And this is an issue, not necessarily long-term, because ultimately, people will grow ayahuasca in greenhouses if they need to. But the issue is really if our pursuit for enlightenment or spiritual sort of gnosis comes at the expense of Indigenous people's access to these plants, plants that have been sort of central to their worldview and the way that they relate to the world. And this is no different from peyote, a small spineless cactus that grows in northern Mexico and southern United States. That cactus takes many, many years to grow. And I spoke with some Wixárika people, the people who made these earrings, and they said that they're losing their access to their ancestors. With the depletion of these cactus, it's not just like an endangered plant. It's like this is the portal into our history. So, it's a mixed thing, but I think that ultimately ayahuasca is an invitation for us to actually change the way that we commodify psychoactive plants. Because there's nothing new about the globalization of psychoactive plants. In fact, Western civilization has been shaped by our appetites for psychoactive plants, from tobacco and coffee. I mean, imagine Manhattan without coffee for a week, it's like impossible. Cocaine, weaponized opium, you kind of get the picture. Like these formerly sacred plants, have been corrupted, maybe, or have been used for more nefarious purposes, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen with ayahuasca and plant medicine. So how do we do that? And that's like the big question.
Very interesting question. Once we go down the rabbit hole of ayahuasca, and other plants have shown that traditionally the human society that we're currently in has done a really bad job at it. I mean, if you look at the coca plant, which is in itself kind of like a matcha latte high, you chew coca and you go into the mountains and hike, and it's beautiful and it's very soothing. But if you mix this with kerosene and make it a kind of a punch, it turns into cocaine, and it's one of the most destructive drugs on the planet, right? And with a massive industry behind it on the black market, which is horrible to get lost in that this is the way we have been dealing with each other and the plants and the indigenous cultures. And I think that's why I'm so excited to have you on the show and to talk about it from the Western perspective, as I'm also a Westerner myself, and realizing that there is a massive responsibility in us to give our best to listen, to learn with, and The question that arises for me here is as Westerners, and I'm definitely from the West, and have lots of contact to some indigenous cultures, and I'm just kind of stunned and humbled by how poor we have dealt with the kind of the transition in the past. But my question, or what I really am curious about, is how can we listen to indigenous cultures and kind of integrate some of the wisdom, some of the knowledge that's actually feasible to integrate into our modern world? Because I guess there are some elements of the sacred primitive way of living that we've gone too far into the other direction in the Western culture. But then it seems to be that there are some other elements of this sacred primitive way of living that we require to break down this fake complexity we've created.
What do you mean when you say primitive, out of curiosity?
Primitive for me usually just means close to the earth.
Like basic.
Yeah, basic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, for one, no two communities are the same, right? Like this neighborhood is not the same as that neighborhood. And for me, that's, it's difficult to talk about Indigenous rights and Indigenous sort of cosmovisions just because each one is so different and is so related to the land that they work with specifically, right? Because in a way, I mean, our perception of time and space and our relationship to other beings is deeply connected to our environments, and especially with Indigenous communities, who have been, in theory, living in a particular ecosystem for a very, very long time. And yeah, I mean, in my own, limited experience, I would say that a lot of it is just about arriving. And I mean, with arriving with permission, obviously, you hear cases of people coming and squatting Indigenous territories, which is not appropriate either. Like, hippies just kind of hanging out in the middle of people's places and not giving back, but really, really understanding, that you're invited into a certain place and getting to know people's troubles, getting to know their happiness and getting to know their troubles, and understanding that, we in positions of privilege who have access to policymakers, who have access to financial resources, we can actually move things in a way that they may not necessarily be able to do, and with that comes patience and failure and learning how to communicate in different tongues and different perceptions of time and scale. I mean, it's a very interesting and humbling experience for sure. But yeah, I would say like it's a combination of recognizing your privileges and where they can be leveraged in order to benefit others, and we do that again, understanding that our fates are all connected and we don't live in utopia unless everyone's on board, basically. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let me change it up a little bit here. I want to know a thing or two about you and your values beyond the journey of ayahuasca and the book and the work you've been doing and are doing in the regenerative space. And I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions just to get into a little bit of a different energy as your beautiful dog is with us. And it's either a yes, no, or maybe, or neither, however what comes out fast and right away. What do you prefer, dance or meditation?
I don't necessarily see them as different. Okay, dance, actually.
Dance, meditation?
Yeah.
Ocean or lake water?
Lake water.
Meat or veggies?
Meat.
Plant trees or fly to Mars?
Plant trees. And dogs. Plant.
Dogs or cats?
Such a hard choice. I love dogs.
Aww.
But only because dog is spelled God backwards, and we have like a godlike relationship to dogs. It's very funny.
Yeah, definitely. That is very, very true. Water or kombucha?
Water.
Cannabis or alcohol?
Cannabis.
If you want something done right, do it yourself or better as a team?
Oh, I'm still learning this one. As a team.
Jungle or desert?
Jungle.
Sophia, what is required for you to experience trust?
This is a deep one. um, trust in myself, which has been a journey for myself, actually. I love people. I love trusting people, but I feel like as long as you don't have confidence in yourself, to really do the thing, to keep the promise, to take the action, the trust it will never sink deep enough to really lock in and move you forward. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In your own words, if you were to describe or define the word purpose, what comes up? What's emerging?
Purpose. Interesting. I see a lot of people write like purpose on like white papers and resumes and stuff. I mean, I guess I think of it like a North Star, when you're almost like an intention, actually. So with plant medicine and in ayahuasca, or just in life in general, if you're ever going into some choppy waters, it's nice to have that sort of an intention, which I guess could also be like a purpose. Why have you come here? And whatever that answer is, kind of leads you in that direction. Yeah, purpose. Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
If you could single-handedly change the education system on the planet, what would you do?
Wow, well, I would do it in a team. First, I would get a team. Nice. And yeah, I mean, again, for working with plants, yeah, it's something that I really wish I had, and caring, right? Like I was laughing the other day about an exercise that I had as a young teen, or maybe even 12 years old, and we were made to carry plastic babies around that would cry every 30 minutes, and you had to either shake them or like change their diaper. Yeah, I'm not joking. There was some sort of like
It's a unique experience.
Baby. Well, I didn't think it was unique. Apparently it was like a hot thing that was happening in the education system in New York at the time. So you carry around this baby, it's crying, whatever, and apparently the idea is that it's supposed to teach you care and responsibility. And it's also a sex ed thing, like you don't want a kid because this is gonna suck. But I would have loved I would love it if we all had to carry plants around for a couple of weeks and have kids really learn that it takes a sense of like intuitive nurturing and patience and compromise and listening to understand if the plant wants to be in the sun, if it wants to be watered, and just observe these things. And it's not like out of a pure fetish for plants, which I may have, but it's more just understanding that working with the elements around us requires a certain degree of yielding receptivity that is not taught in the education system today.
Yielding receptivity. I like that a lot. So segueing from that question about the education system, like elements that we could add to it, I was talking earlier about planetary purpose and holistic visions. And so my question is, if we were to actually integrate a 7-generational point of view about Earth, and we have like a 210 year vision, right? 7 generations into the future. What would be your take on that? What would be included in that Earth vision for you? Or what can you see when you kind of raise your head beyond our own lifetimes?
So 7 generations from today, it's a vision. What would be an integral aspect of this sort of holistic vision? And yeah, initiation and rites of passage, yeah, and ritual, all of those together. I think that there's a value to the intentional sort of creation of space that doesn't exist in everyday space, if that makes sense. So opening up a ritual container, whether it's staying in a cave for a year or eating a psychoactive plant that puts you on the brink of death or whatever it is, we would create our own rituals that are appropriate for our own environments and our own needs. But some sort of, ritual that would exist in our communities that would constantly ask us to pause and come together and really, really, consider what it is to be human and our own humanity and our relationships and the things that we care about, and yeah, definitely ritual would be an aspect of that. Yeah.
An initiation into what it means to be human, what the point of this journey is.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it almost sounds vague. I wish I could describe it more, but kind of, I'm thinking of ayahuasca, and I think that's why so many people are actually flocking to this experience, is because there is very often you find a sort of an ego death or a near death experience that comes with that. And, when you encounter the edge of yourself there, you have these aspects of your life flash before you, and you think, what's important to me, what's important for my community. You're not necessarily gazing super, super far into the future, into these abstract ambitions, but really understanding on a close level what it is to be in a community and what it is to be human. And, and those don't necessarily have to be, dangerous rituals or anything. They could even be moon lodges, where women come together during their menstruation cycles and they just sit together and they just be menstruating humans together and just talk about that experience. But just having these spaces that sort of punctuate time, because I think as humans, as long as we continue on with the same sort of mechanical mindset to just solve problems and get stuff done, we're not really going to sink into that, again, yielding receptivity that I think we need to learn in order to adapt to our changing times and our changing ecosystems. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a last question for you, and that is directed towards your younger self. If there is one lesson, we can just do one lesson that you know now and that you're embodying now that you could have told your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Nobody else is going to do it. If that makes sense. That didn't come out quite right. But
I like it.
It's like, you're fucking it. Yeah. Like, it's you. It's always been
your turn.
It's always going to be you, and it's your turn, right? Exactly. Like, my whole youth, I'm still freaking young. I'm 26, but yeah. I just living this life like, oh, those guys will do it, or like maybe. Yeah. And I even noticed just chores around the house or whatever, just this total lack of agency in my environment, and in every day I grow more and more into that. Like, this is it. This is now or never, and you got to step up and make it happen.
Beautiful. Sophia, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for bringing your dog into the show. No worries at all. What is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything you'd like to point at? What people could look up about you or go buy the book when Plant Stream?
Yeah, a couple of things right now. I don't know when we'll actually be sharing this with your community, but I highly recommend looking at different organizations that are supporting regenerative programs in the Amazon, especially after the fires. Recommending the BOA Foundation, Amazon Watch, Rainforest Action Network, Chaikuni Institute. If you feel moved to give or sort of volunteer with any of these guys, I highly recommend working with them as a first step into really making it happen. And then, if you want to sort of follow me and what I'm up to, you can follow me on Twitter. I also have a website where you can get a vague notion of what I'm up to in this life. And stay tuned for INI, the nonprofit that's on the horizon. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sophia, for being on the show GreenPlanet BluePlanet. Serves you, that enriches your life. And if that's the case, make sure to share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, follow the social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and simply be part of the conversation. One step at a time. Wherever you are, have yourself a stellar day.